Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome Vice President and General Counsel of Douala, Adrian Sum.
Thank you, and welcome back, everyone, to Monetery 2019. I hope you are all still a little bit dry. They say that, rain is lucky on your wedding day? Well, I say rain is lucky on your monetary day. My name is Adrian Sum, and I am the General Counsel at Douala. Today, we have a very special guest, Andrew Yang, who has devoted a significant portion of his career to strengthening the tech ecosystem throughout the US. After a short stint as a corporate attorney, Andrew led and built several startups in industries ranging from healthcare to education. In 2012, he started a nonprofit organization called Venture for America that has trained over 700 entrepreneurs across 20 cities to startup success. That desire to modernize the US economy through a greater focus on innovation has led him to his current role as a Democratic candidate for president in 2020. Over the next hour, we'll talk about entrepreneurship, opportunities for growth in the Midwest, how he thinks technology is shaping America's future, and of course, a few questions about his campaign. Please join me in welcoming Andrew Yang.
Hello, everyone. I'm over there? Cool. Thanks, guys.
Thank you for joining us. It's a thrill to have you here.
It's great to be here. Hello, Monetery. Hello, Iowa. It's awesome to be back. I actually gave a speech in this very room about 6 months ago. Something called Progress Iowa. You can Google it. It's on YouTube.
This must be your, 17th visit to Iowa this month, maybe?
Not this month.
Okay.
I believe it's my 13th trip in the last year.
Okay. So before we get into your campaign...
Pizza Kitchen. Pizza Ranch.
Fong's Pizza? Never mind.
She doesn't know.
Anyway, so before we get to your campaign, Monetery is focused on bringing together innovators, founders, to talk about how we build more vibrant ecosystems, specifically in the Midwest, in tech. And so I want to start right before your candidacy with Venture for America. What were your goals and aspirations when you founded Venture for America?
So I'd run an education company that grew to become #1 in the US and was acquired in 2009. And then I saw that a lot of talented people were heading to Wall Street and big consulting firms, including a lot of people from the Midwest, from Illinois, Iowa. And so I thought that this was bad for everyone because I was myself an unhappy corporate attorney for 5 whole months. And I thought it was a super drag. And so I left to start a company that did not work out. It had its mini rise and maximum fall. So how many of you all work in startups? Virtually all of you, right? So I have to say, I love people who work in startups. I love entrepreneurs, in part because it's so tough and isolating. And if anyone asks you how you're doing, you always have to answer, it's going great. Even when it's not going great. And so I get it. My first company did not work out. And my parents were still telling people I was a lawyer. So I know what that journey looks like. And my first company failed. The next company did not meet its goals. Another company ran out of money. And so it was really my fourth company that became successful and then was acquired. And I saw that all of these smart young people in particular were heading to Wall Street and McKinsey and the like. And I said, this is also a train wreck because they're doing jobs they don't like that aren't going to drive real value in our society. And so I thought what they wanted to do really in their heart of hearts was to become like you all, to go start businesses and work in early stage companies in Detroit or Cleveland or St. Louis or Birmingham or New Orleans. So I quit my job. I donated $120,000 to start Venture for America. And then I started calling rich friends, asking them, do you love America? And then the savvy among them said, what does it mean if I say yes to this question? And I said, at least $10,000. And so 12 of them said, I love America for $10,000. I was like, I thought you did. And so then, so we started with a budget of $250,000. I started going around college campuses and asking young people, how many of you want to be entrepreneurs? Their hands go up. Then I said, how many of you are going to go spend time at a banker consulting firm to quote unquote learn about business so you can start a business? And then their hands go up. And I'd say, how many of you would rather not do that, but you'd rather go work at an early stage company with a founding team? We give you the training, the network that you're looking for. And if you go through this program, Venture for America, we'll even have seed money waiting for you on the other end. Because one of my rules in life is there has to be money involved. That's a joke, by the way. But there had to be money involved, because you can't pitch young people, hey, give up these lucrative positions, go work at these startups, we'll help you start a business if you're not willing to put your money where your mouth is. So this was my vision for Venture for America. I quit my job to start it in 2011, and then spent 7 years running it. We expanded to 18 cities, helped create several thousand jobs. I was honored by the Obama administration as an ambassador of entrepreneurship. I got to bring my wife to meet President Obama. And the weirdest thing about that gathering was I was the only one who brought my spouse. I was like, what are you all doing? How do you stay married? Everyone else was like, this is my VP of something or other. And I was like, this is my wife, guys. So I'm a huge champion of what you all are living day to day. I think that you all are really pillars and heroes of your communities, and you don't get enough support, you don't get enough recognition, you have to tell everyone it's going great whenever someone asks you about it, and we need to do more for you. I spent 7 years trying to help train people to become you.
You mentioned not having enough support, and I'm thinking specifically of underrepresented groups in tech. I was looking at the VFA website, and it looks like in your program, almost 40% of participants have been people of color, and almost 50% are women. How has Venture for America been so successful at attracting and then including these generally underrepresented groups?
Yeah, so our first group was not diverse at all. It was primarily a bunch of white men, and no one was happy. They were not happy, we were not happy, no one was happy. Now, this was 2012, and you could sort of imagine if you're a brand new program, then you'd recruit folks who perhaps had a slightly different profile. So we started aggressively trying to broaden who we could attract into the organization, and I'm very happy to say we made strides every year. So at this point, we're one of the role models in the entire country. But I do want to go a level deeper and say that it would be disingenuous for us to then clap ourselves in the back and say, we did it, we recruited a lot of women, a lot of people of color, because on the other end of it, it's still much, much more difficult for women and people of underrepresented minorities to actually start a business, because they don't have the resources to do so, they don't have the informal network, they don't have the, frankly, in many cases, families that are in position to help support that kind of risk-taking. Because if you look at a lot of the people who are in the startup ecosystem, a lot of them come from families where they could afford to take some personal risk. And so when you recruit folks from different backgrounds, that's only the first step in a very, very long chain of events if you want to try and actually have true representation as founders and leaders in this community.
You've personally experienced both ends of the startup spectrum. You've had significant struggle and significant success. What advice, I think it was successful. Sounds like
it was successful, sure.
All right.
It's like,
what advice do you have for...
I'm not running for president and all. I mean, I must have done all right.
What advice do you have for the entrepreneurs and the founders and the students and the dreamers and the builders in the audience today who would love to be as successful as you?
Well, one thing a mentor said to me that was right, and this is one reason why it's so tough, is he said that you need to devote at least 5 years to something to even see if it's going to work. And that's a hard thing to hear when you're young, because you're like, 5 years? But even if something's successful, it generally takes 2 to 3 years to even start getting a foothold in the marketplace, and then you can see where you're going by about year 5. And so when I was in that position myself, the hardest thing was blocking out all the noise around you, because everyone has advice for you when you're trying to start a business or operate. And because you're young, you think to yourself, okay, I should listen. Like, some of these people have done things, they know better than me, I should listen. But it can drive you crazy, and it can actually undermine your ability to find your own judgment and path and voice. So my advice to you is not to listen to all of the advice you get, because you can actually go down various, pretty much you name any business problem, I can probably find you authoritative people on both sides of that. You know what I mean? Like people who advise you on either direction. So number one is try and develop your own voice and judgment. And number two is have a set of people that you can be honest with no matter what. People that will stand by you through thick and thin, where you can actually vent to them. You can talk about the struggles, talk about the issues. Because I had a few of those people, and they were worth their weight in gold. And when my first company failed, when I was 26, it felt like the end of the world, but you see who your friends are. And the people that were my friends then are still my friends now.
That's great advice. We actually had a panel earlier this morning, and some of the same themes came out, which is essentially the advice can go in any single direction, and sometimes it conflicts. So there you have it. Okay, so turning now to the fact that you are here in the Midwest, in Iowa. I also noticed something else on the Venture for America website. There are no cities in Iowa represented in Venture for America. Why
so
is
you
that?
know I did not intend to run for president at that time.
Okay. But you do have or Venture for America does have other startups running in Midwestern cities. Are there any particular successes that you'd like to share with the group today?
So there's one company that was founded by a fellow out of Detroit called Leagueside that now pairs major corporate sponsors with local little leagues around the country. They noticed that little leagues had local sponsors often on their jerseys and said, wouldn't a big company love to have that opportunity? And so that struck me as this incredible win-win-win, where they're booking millions of dollars in sponsorship revenue for little leagues that helps youth sports, it helps the companies, it helps the parents, it helps the community. So that was an inefficiency they saw that if you address it, you can actually help everybody. So that's a company, Leagueside, I was very proud of. There's a company that was also started out of Detroit called Bonza, which is this chickpea pasta that you might have seen in your specialty grocery stores. It's guilt-free pasta, it's high protein, gluten-free, it's tasty. If you're a parent like I am, you can actually give your kids mac and cheese and not feel like a bad parent. No parents here? You guys too busy. You guys like, I'm too busy making it happen. Procreation. Yeah.
There you go.
I feed my kids regular mac and cheese and I feel fine about it. That's true.
Okay, well, we've got basically all the pillars of a high-functioning tech ecosystem represented in the room today. We've got the students, we've got the founders, we've got the builders, we've got investors, we've got government, we've got schools. I'd like to understand from what your perspective is on what schools can do specifically to encourage students to pursue a career path in entrepreneurship.
So this is rough because if you look at the numbers, the number of entrepreneurship programs at schools has more than doubled over the last 20 years. And during that time period, the rate of business formation among young people has gone down by 50%. So schools teaching entrepreneurship is not actually causing people to run out there and start businesses. I mean, you just have to own those two numbers. And part of it is that if you are in an entrepreneurship class, you actually start sometimes thinking that, wow, there are all these things I need to know in order to start a business. Whereas a generation ago, you might have been sort of dumb and been like, I'm going to start a business. And then you just do it, and then you start lurching forward, get yourself into some pitfalls, but then you generally dig your way out. The other thing is that in the day, you might not owe $38,000 coming out of school, which is now the average debt load. And so schools can, in my opinion, do more to help encourage entrepreneurship. And a lot of it should involve some real resources. It goes back to there should be money involved. It's like if you wanted to help students start businesses, it would be really easy. You just give them money and say, like, start the business. Or at minimum, you forgive their debt. Like, that would show you're serious. If you have someone just telling them how to do it, that's not serious. That's like me teaching you how to serve a tennis ball. Like, can you go out and serve a tennis ball afterwards? Probably not. You know what I mean? I could teach you the lesson. You could tell me what the steps are. But unless you go out there and play, you're not going to know how to play.
Same question, and I think this ties directly to what you just said about loan forgiveness. What can government do to support more people going into entrepreneurship as a career path?
Well, one of the examples I used to draw was that, and you're a lawyer, I can say this is fine, is if you're a directionless, ambitious 20-something-year-old out of college and you decide you want to go to law school, your parents will say that's a great idea, it's easy to find, and the government will give you a $100,000 loan to go, no questions asked. If you decide you want to start a business, your parents will say that's a terrible idea, it's hard to find, and no one will give you a $100,000 loan. And so there's no mystery why we have an oversupply of miserable, indebted law school graduates, underemployed as well, and then an undersupply of entrepreneurs in Iowa and places around the country. And so the government should try and balance those two sets of choices out and try and develop an appetite for risk, particularly among younger folks, because right now the rates of business formation among millennials are the lowest that we've seen in generations.
Okay, so let's say we jump forward to the future. Your programs have worked. Lots of students are going into entrepreneurship. They're building startups. They're building exciting things. Does it matter what they build?
Oh yeah, of course it matters what they build. What a silly question. No, I'm kidding. I mean, so this part of it too is that so I obviously mentored a lot of young people, and oftentimes their native ambitions start out as things that are not super market supportable or market friendly. Like that they look and feel more like nonprofits or add-ons to schools than they do commercial businesses or investable businesses. And we have to know that investable businesses is this whole other category. Is I could come to you with a really solid business that will make everyone money, but it's not investable. Because if I'm an investor, it's not enough for you to come to me with a solid business. You need to come to me with a solid business that has a chance to significantly multiply my investment like many times over. So there are these different types of opportunities, and the market loves certain opportunities and it does not love others. One reason why I'm running for president right now is that to me the biggest, thorniest, most vital problems of this era are not market-supported problems. If anything, actually, the market is going to start turning on more and more people in a way that's increasingly punitive. And so the things that people build are actually of vital importance, like the types of problems you decide to solve. The danger is that we all listen to investors and the money as to what kinds of problems we solve. And I'll use myself as an example. There was a problem I was solving for 6 years, which was how to help people get better at standardized tests so they could get into fancy schools. The market liked that. Like my business grew and grew and grew. Like, I did well. Like some people, like a lot of people did well. Then the next problem I decided to tackle was how do we get more entrepreneurs in Michigan, Ohio, Alabama, Louisiana, whatnot. There was a philanthropic market for that problem, but no one's gonna get rich on that. You know what I mean? And then now the problem I'm tackling is how do you prepare a country for an economy that is evolving in unprecedented ways that's now going to push more and more American workers to the sidelines. This is also not a market-supported problem, unfortunately. The market does not have an intrinsic interest in unemployed cashiers or unemployed call center workers or unemployed truck drivers. The market doesn't have like a natural stake. And so the types of problems you all are trying to solve are actually vital. The toughest part is that the market is going to steer your energies in certain directions and certain types of problems.
So we could have a situation where the builders in here are actually building the next Candy Crush or the next Angry Birds. This is a good thing or a bad thing?
Well, it's not necessarily a bad thing. It's just that those are the problems that the market would be rewarding at that moment in time. Where if someone builds the next Candy Crush, then someone will be very happy and someone will make a lot of money on it.
Okay. You've said in the past, I was listening to a couple of your interviews, that government just doesn't understand technology. We had a speaker earlier today, Sherry Davidoff, and she mentioned that she's a cybersecurity expert. She was talking to somebody at the Fed about the security checklists that they use when figuring out whether or not a company is managing their security appropriately. And the person that she was speaking to at the Fed admitted that they didn't really know what they were looking for. So to me, that strikes me as a classic example of government not necessarily understanding technology. What are we going to do to fix this?
Yeah, what indeed. So if you have the feeling, raise your hand if you think our government's decades behind in technology. So if you didn't have your hand up, you should. Because, and I'll just give you a fact that will let you know it's actually inarguable. The US Congress got rid of the Office of Technology Assessment, which used to advise it on technology issues, in 1995. So we are exactly 24 years behind in technology because Congress has not actually had any technical advice or expertise. Why did they get rid of the OTA? To save money. Think about that for a second. How much did that cost us as a society? Talk about shooting yourself in the foot. Talk about terrible timing. So our government is now way, way, way behind the curve on technology. Even the recent AI initiative that they announced, there were $0 behind it, and most of it amounted to simply telling agencies, hey, assign someone to AI. And so you know what those agencies did? They looked around and said, who can we assign to AI? They found someone and said, you're now our AI person. And then that person now is trying to bone up on it. And that's what passes for our AI policy right now in 2019. So this is just the rough truth of what our government is right now. It's one reason I'm running for president is that I was exposed to it. I was an honorary ambassador, and then I was an appointee in the Commerce Department and some other things. And being in those rooms was shocking. For you all, watching Congress's bringing in the questioning of Mark Zuckerberg and other leaders was probably shocking, right? Where you saw that and you were like, wow, these people have no idea what the heck is going on. And that was after days of preparation and their professional staff giving them the best questions they could come up with. That was not spontaneous. That wasn't a congressperson just rolling in and being like, oh, let's see what question I have. No, that was their best work product in action. So think about what that means. When you go to DC, you go to Capitol Hill, it is a whole different world. One of the reasons, again, I'm doing what I'm doing now is that you see how insular every universe is. Tech is insular in its own way. Midwestern tech, not so much, because you all are much more normal than the techies in other places. They're downright weird in some of the other places. If you're in from SF, you're like, yeah, that's right. But DC is its own isolated universe. And so if you're DC, you could be terrible at technology and nothing would happen to you in terms of your responsibilities or your job performance. And that could go on for years. You know who suffers for it? We suffer and our kids suffer.
Okay, so you want to push more bright minds into technology, innovation, not necessarily building Candy Crush, interesting new technologies, but we can't understand what technology does, and our government certainly can't fast enough so that we can use these technologies responsibly. Do you really want our rate of innovation to increase if we can't handle it?
Well, so one of the beautiful things about entrepreneurship, one of my favorite things about it, and it's reflected here in this room, is that there are many people who want to work on different types of problems that would not necessarily be like AI or high tech or machine learning or the rest of it. So one of the examples I use is that my wife is at home with our two boys, one of whom is autistic, and there are many, many problems that arise with raising an autistic child. That some of it you could address with technology, but most of it is human. And so my wife looks up and says, what are the problems she faces? Are there other parents that solve those problems? Entrepreneurship does not necessarily need to mean high tech. And there are so many needs in our communities that if we had more people engaged in entrepreneurship and problem solving, broadly defined, that is what I'm championing. I would also champion a more intelligent national approach to innovation and technology. I was just with the folks at OpenAI in Silicon Valley, and I talked to them about their competitive landscape and what they're working on. And they are very concerned that China is going to leapfrog the US because China has more access to more data, which is food for the algorithms. And that at this point, you don't need breakthrough algorithms, you just need more and better data. And so the folks in Silicon Valley said to me, it's look, we're spending $3, $4, $5 billion on computing infrastructure. The Chinese government essentially has a blank check and then they're making those computing resources available to Chinese companies. And so they asked me as president to whether I would try and help America stay competitive, and I believe that's something that would be international well-being. So I'd love to help those companies stay on the cutting edge.
Speaking of cutting edge, you have, I think, beautifully threaded the needle between being perceived as a futurist, as being tech savvy, as somebody who actually gets technology, but also having a few positions that aren't necessarily friendly to the tech industry. For example, I think everybody on the Democratic candidate list is behind the idea of breaking up big tech, Facebook, Google, Amazon. Should the tech industry actually be nervous about your positions?
Well, one of the things I've said is like, look, we can't have 20th century solutions to 21st century problems. So if you're just going into technology saying break them up, that'll fix the problems, like it won't. It's a very anachronistic way to look at the problems. And tech is different. One of the examples I use is that none of us has any interest in using the 4th best navigation app. You know what I mean? Like a lot of politicians are talking about, you know what's going to fix it? Competition. And it's like, well, in some cases, I just want one thing that works. And that one thing that works might just get more data than the rest of it, and then we all use it. And that's actually the best way for that product to become the best. That's why we're all Googling things and not Binging things, you know? And so you know, so if the government's like, ooh, you know what we need? We need to like Bing this thing. It's like, no, we don't. So you have to figure out what problems you're trying to solve for, and in some instances, it would be appropriate to have some of the companies divest certain parts of themselves. Like for Amazon to have its platform and then promote its own house brands over other companies, like, yeah, that's messed up. That's anti-competitive. Like, you should probably do something about that. But if you look at the actual problems we should be struggling with, so one problem I'm passionate about, there's pretty clear and compelling data that we're seeing unprecedented levels of anxiety, depression, and mental illness among teenage girls in particular. And it's coincident with smartphone use and social media app use, like in that population. Does breaking up the ownership of Facebook, Instagram, and WhatsApp make our kids less troubled and healthier? It probably has nothing to do with it. You know, so like breaking them up like is not the problem. In that instance, the problem is, like as my friend Tristan Harris says, we have the smartest engineers in the country turning supercomputers into slot machines and dopamine delivery devices for teenage girls. That is the problem. So it's not like an ownership structure solves it. What solves it is getting into the guts of the app and saying, okay, your financial incentives cut this way, like our human incentives cut this other way. Like, we need to have some kind of countermeasure. And some of the techies, I'm happy to say, you want to know what communities use tech less than anyone else is the kids of Silicon Valley. Because all of the people in Silicon Valley don't let their kids use it. You think about what that says. And a lot of the techies in Silicon Valley are coming clean and saying, look, it should not be my job to figure out like where to draw the line. Like, I actually need government's help with this. So techies are in some ways being very honest. And I think most people sense that I'm very pro-progress and pro-innovation. But at this point, like even the techies who are moral are asking for some level of cooperation and collaboration.
Okay. Let's switch it up and talk about something a little lighter, like healthcare. I was talking to Mike Coswell of the Technology Association of Iowa last night, and I asked him, what is the biggest hurdle that startups in Iowa face right now? And he said it's healthcare. It's just too expensive for startups to provide healthcare to employees.
Oh man, I've been there. It's the worst.
And it limits growth.
Yep.
You lose talent. What would you say to Mike and the rest of the audience about your plan for healthcare?
So this is a problem I've lived on multiple fronts, where if you decide to start a business, the first thing you worry about, is your healthcare, particularly if you're married and have a family. And so right now our healthcare system is this giant impediment to our dynamism and growth. It makes it harder to hire people. It makes it harder to treat them like full-time employees if you do hire them. It makes it harder to start a company. It makes it harder to switch jobs. It's like this source of friction. It's locking us in place. So the best way to remedy that is to get healthcare that's accessible, that people don't have to worry about, that's portable, doesn't rely upon your job. And the easiest way to get there is to adopt some sort of Medicare for all where you just have healthcare as a right of citizenship in this country as it is, I think, in your native Canada. I think.
You weren't supposed to tell them. Yes. I'm Canadian.
We like
proud
Canadians.
Of it.
It's cool.
I'm proud of it.
Yeah, you should be proud.
I am. Okay.
Just like I'm a proud American, USA.
Okay. You were extraordinarily successful as an entrepreneur. Why on earth would you run for president and make life so much harder for yourself?
Yeah, my wife asks me that every morning. No, she's on board. She's cool with it. At this point, she's like, it's only worth it if you win now. I'm very much an accidental politician. I never intended to run for president, though I'm doing very well. According to the internet, I'm the 7th most likely to win. I'm at about 7%. It's a steal. At that money, it's a steal. If you bet, I'll make you some money. So I was an entrepreneur, sold a company, and then said, the problem is that we have all of our talent, not all of it, but a lot of it, getting sucked up into certain places and certain industries, and it's bad for the majority of our society and our economy. So I said, okay, I'll spend 5-6 years trying to fix that. So then you start an organization, Venture for America, very proud of it, but then you realize that you're pouring water into a giant hole, like a bathtub that's a giant hole ripped in the bottom. That like the problems you're addressing are actually much bigger, and they're actually growing all the time. Where 30% of, how many of you notice stores closing around where you live? 30% of Main Street stores and malls are going to close in the next 4 years because Amazon's sucking up $20 billion in commerce. And Amazon's going to pay 0 in federal taxes in terms of like value coming back to communities. So like here I am helping create hundreds, thousands of jobs, and then you see that tens of thousands of jobs are going to get lost in the other direction. 2.5 million call center workers in the US making $14 an hour. How long before AI can do that job? 3.5 million truck drivers in this country, 94% men, and 7 million work at truck stops, motels, and diners that rely on the trucks actually stopping and having the driver get out and have a meal. So what happens when my friends in Silicon Valley successfully develop autonomous vehicles? Like I realized that there's this tidal wave coming the other direction and that no one was doing anything about it. That our country was actually scapegoating immigrants for problems immigrants have virtually nothing to do with. And that it's the fact that technology is pushing our economy in, right now we're in the midst of the greatest economic and technological transformation in the history of our country. What experts are calling the 4th industrial revolution. And our political figures are completely absent on this. When's the last time you've heard a politician say the words 4th industrial revolution? Never. This is the first time. And I'm barely a politician. So imagine being the person who won awards for helping create jobs around the country, realizing that your work is like a wall of sand in front of a tidal wave, and that your country does not understand what's happening. And so what choices do you have at that point if you're a rational adult, and in my case, a parent, an American, and I love this country very, very deeply. And so then your list of options, if you want to do something about it, becomes very, very limited very quickly. And so I drew up, what could I do that would actually move the needle and help us manage this historic transition? And running for president and winning was the only thing that had any chance of success.
Okay, so tell us about the Freedom Dividend, which is a central part of your platform.
Yeah, so if you've heard anything about me, you know that there's an Asian guy running for president who wants to give everyone $1,000 a month. Am I right? So this is the Freedom Dividend, my rebranding of universal basic income because it tests much better with the word freedom. So if you look at our country's history, Thomas Paine was for it at the founding of the country, called it the Citizens' Dividend. Martin Luther King championed it in 1967 and was fighting for it until the day he was assassinated in 1968, called it the Guaranteed Minimum Income. Milton Friedman, 1,000 economists signed a study saying this would be tremendous for America. It even passed the US House of Representatives twice in 1971 under Nixon. And 11 years later, one state passed a dividend where now everyone in that state gets between $1,000 and $2,000 a year, no questions asked. And what state is that? Alaska. And how do they fund it? Oil. And what is the oil of the 21st century? Data, technology, AI, software, autonomous vehicles. What they're doing with oil money in Alaska, we can do for the entire country with technology money. And it's not just me. Elon Musk, Mark Zuckerberg, Barack Obama, Jamie Dimon, the CEO of JP Morgan Chase, just recently came out for a negative income tax, which is essentially what I'm proposing. So it starts as something that's far out, but it actually becomes vital the more you reflect on it. Because Donald Trump is our president because we'd automated away 4 million manufacturing jobs in Ohio, Michigan, Pennsylvania, Wisconsin, and 40,000 right here in Iowa. And what we did to the manufacturing jobs, we will now do to the retail jobs, the call center jobs, the fast food jobs, the truck driving jobs, and the bookkeeping jobs, the accounting jobs, a lot of the legal jobs. I know. And so what starts as something that seems dramatic actually becomes vital very, very quickly. And then you start to realize, wait, if we got $1,000 a month, we would spend it in our communities, it would grow our Main Street businesses, and it would create tens, hundreds of thousands of new entrepreneurs around the country. Because right now we're paying lip service to entrepreneurship, but most people can't take that kind of risk. When 78% are living paycheck to paycheck, 57% can't afford an unexpected $500 bill, and then you say, hey, start a business? They're like, what are you talking about? I can barely make ends meet. I'm not gonna start a business. I know hundreds of entrepreneurs, and virtually none of them were in that boat. Virtually none of them were like, I don't know where I'm gonna get next month's rent. Why don't I start a company? Like that's not the way the process works. So if we put money into people's hands, it will actually create many new entrepreneurs. It will recognize the kind of work that my wife does, which right now the market values at 0. And we talk about empowering women all the time. $1,000 a month would go much further to empower women and allow millions of women to walk away from exploitative and abusive jobs and relationships, just like that. Like we can actually empower women for real if we pass a dividend of $1,000 a month. As you can tell, I get very animated about this. So this is the flagship proposal of my campaign, is the freedom dividend of $1,000 a month for every American adult.
Can you elaborate more on how we're going to pay for this? You mentioned a value-added tax. What are we going to tax?
Yeah, so the toughest part about taxing automation is that it's unclear what automation looks like in real life a lot of the time. Like if you walk into a CVS and there's an iPad where there used to be a cashier, is that automation? You could argue yes, you could argue maybe they needed to do it. But we have the money. Amazon literally did pay 0 in federal taxes last year. And that's not unusual for them. Their lifetime tax rate is 3%. So think about that. You get $1 trillion company paying 0 in taxes, and then you say, like, well, where's the money going to come from? Because our economy is now so massive at $20 trillion plus, a mild value-added tax at even half the European level generates over $800 billion in new revenue. And the beautiful thing about putting this money into our hands is that it doesn't disappear. It circulates over and over again in the economy. It goes to our own bills and like school loans and car repairs we've been putting off. It builds a trickle-up economy. And so you get back a lot of the money in consumer spending and growth. You get back a lot of the money in lower costs in things like incarceration, homelessness services, emergency room healthcare, direct costs we're spending $1 trillion plus on. And this is the thing that is apparent, is most exciting. You increase GDP by $700 billion just by having better health and education outcomes for your people. How many of you all work at Dwolla? So if you work at Dwolla, you work for a really good company led by genuine leaders who care about you. And so what they talk about all the time is like, invest in our people. Invest in our people, then our company will do better. In the public space, we have the opposite approach. It's like, do not invest in anyone. And then we end up paying for it anyway on the back end when they wind up in our jails or emergency rooms or shelters. This is very politician-y, but I'm in Iowa, so I guess it's okay. I was with a prison guard in New Hampshire, and he said we should pay people to stay out of jail because we pay so much when they're in jail. And so this is the new way to invest in our people, but we have to take it beyond the companies like Dwolla and the tech universe. We have to take it to our entire citizenry.
What would you do with your $12,000?
At this point, well, after I'm president and then I serve for 8 years, that would be a great 8 years. Then I would have that dividend. I would take my wife on a nice vacation because she deserves it.
Okay, we are coming down to our last 10 minutes, and after that, we're going to switch to audience questions. What do you want to make sure that the audience here in Iowa know about you before they go home tonight so that they will actually go home and Google you?
All right, so some of you heard very little about me and my candidacy. What I want you to know is that I can 100% win this whole thing. I'm polling at 3% nationwide. I've raised over $3 million in increments of only $19 each. So my fans are cheaper than Bernie's. And my name recognition is lower than anyone else's in the field. I'm polling at 2% in Iowa, and only 5% of Iowans say they've heard a lot about me. That ratio is crazy. Like, think about that. I'm 8th in your state, and only 5% of you have even heard about me. So what Nate Silver said was, like, based upon these numbers do not match up. That Andrew Yang should not be polling this well, raising this much money if his name recognition is this low. And so what Nate Silver, who's hyper analytical, said is that these numbers suggest that Andrew Yang's campaign has the potential to grow and grow and grow, and he can win the whole thing. This is not an issues campaign, this is a winning campaign. It's not left, it's not right, it's forward, and that's where we have to take the country in 2020.
So what we like to ask monetary speakers is whether or not you have any book recommendations, whether for information, for education, or simply for reading enjoyment.
A book that really influenced me profoundly is sort of an oldie at this point. It's called Built to Last by Jim Collins and Jerry Porras. It's about building a quality organization. Ben, did you read this book? You probably just lived it, man. You're like, I don't need to read this book. I wrote the book. But that book actually helped me become an entrepreneur. It talked about how a high-quality organization is its own and most important invention. So that book influenced me a lot. I have to recommend my own book, which we've been giving copies out, called The War on Normal People. It's about the impact of technology on the workforce. And then if you're interested in AI, there's a book, AI Superpowers, that talks about some of the ideas I just expressed by a guy named Kai-Fu Lee, who's one of the AI pioneers.
Okay, speaking of AI, one last question from me before we turn to the audience. And if you've got one, just stick your hand up. A mic runner will bring you a mic. I read in a New York Times article this quote that you said that you would love to have a 3D hologram that could be put on a flatbed truck and rolled around the battleground states like Iowa, giving a recorded version of your stump speech. That sounds like technology replacing the human, specifically you in this case. Is that a good thing?
Well, we're testing out the hologram right now. There's video online of me dancing with Tupac. Okay. And we're doing it only if it actually emphasizes the themes of this campaign, which is that we don't need to do things the same way over and over again, and that technology can supplement the way we accomplish various goals and tasks. As you can tell, I have zero reluctance to hop on a plane and come to Iowa. But if there is another hologram me just marching around simultaneously, that could be really cool. And we would only do it if folks actually enjoyed it. If people were like, oh, some people would rather, raise your hand if you'd rather see a hologram me than the real me. See, that's what I'm talking about, some people. So we'd only do it if it was a genuine value add to the campaign and not like a gimmick.
Okay. Questions from the audience? I don't want to start with Ben, but because he's the only one I can see, I'm going to start with Ben.
I was going to say, if anybody else wants to go first, it's cool with me. Let's go over there.
Okay, on that side.
Thanks for speaking again today. My question is, there's lots of proposals for making government efficient. You talked about their use of technology and that. One would be, for example, like having the IRS prepare tax returns for most citizens, right? Like that's an obvious one.
I'm so passionate about that. It's ridiculous.
I am too, but I also know like that destroys tens or hundreds of thousands of seasonal and potentially permanent jobs in an industry that is honestly built on that inefficiency. I'm guessing that's not the only one. How do you sort of balance this drive for efficiency and technology with obviously real jobs and immediate pain for families in all kinds of cities across the country?
Well, it's one reason why a dividend is so vital, in my opinion, because if you looked up and said, hey, we can't touch that because it's someone's living, then there'd be a lot of things that would be off limits. And simultaneously, there are ways of life we are destroying very, very quickly. It just depends upon someone's political protection and clout. In the case of IRS and accountants, you know why we don't have automated tax returns? Because the lobbyists went in and literally got the House to say, hey, you need to leave it alone. Now I'm going to undo that as president. I'm going to cram that bill down. And okay, so I'm going to go a little bit further. To me, tax day is an emblem of how our government does not operate like a business. Now, you can't operate government like a business in most respects because they're different. But we all know that if we had hundreds of billions of dollars in revenue coming from hundreds of millions of customers on a particular day, we would try and make that day as easy for them as possible. We would celebrate that day. We'd call it Revenue Day. We'd give everyone the day off. We would automate the heck out of it. And after you pay your taxes, we would then send you a thank you video showing where your money went. And you could elect where to send 1% of it. And then your attitude towards your government would improve marginally because you're like, well, they're trying. They're like, tell me where the money went. You know, they've got like a cool video with like The Rock and Oprah like celebrating me. Like they're having a party on Revenue Day. I got the day off. They tried to fill my taxes up. So that to me is just like a basic business practice. But you can't shy away from automating tax returns because it's going to get rid of some tax preparers' seasonal jobs. But it is one reason why the dividend is so important. Because it makes it easier to make these changes if people aren't relying upon a job for their very survival.
Who's got the mic?
In the past, when there's been new technologies that have been disruptive, that have taken away jobs, of course, there's always people that hurts, you know, but over time, that has allowed better jobs to come to place. I mean, we wouldn't want to do a lot of the jobs that were very commonplace 100 years ago. I'm just curious, do you think that the automation that's coming now is that at a scale that makes this very different than disruption in the past? Are there similarities? Like what? I think you understand.
I do. So I studied economics in college. How many of you all studied economics? I'm sure some of you. So according to my economics textbook, if you were to get rid of 4 million manufacturing jobs, those workers would get retrained, reskilled, find new jobs, higher productivity roles, and all would be well. In real life, here in Iowa and around the country, half of those manufacturing workers left the workforce and never worked again. And of that group, about half filed for disability. And then you saw a surge in suicides and drug overdoses to a point where our life expectancy has declined for the last 3 years as a country because those two have overtaken vehicle deaths as causes of death. None of this was in my economics textbook. You just got to follow the facts and see where they lie. 44% of American jobs are either repetitive manual or repetitive cognitive, and thus at least theoretically subject to automation in this next period. Now, there will be many, many new jobs we can't predict that will come into being, and some of you are in those jobs. But those jobs will have a very high tendency to be for different people in different places with different skills of different backgrounds than the folks who are losing their jobs. Only 33% of Americans have a college degree, 42% if you include associate's degrees. The vast majority of American workers are high school grads, and the most common jobs in the economy are administrative and clerical, retail and sales, food service and food prep, truck driving and transportation, and manufacturing. So if I create many new wondrous logistics managers and systems engineers jobs, it's going to be very cold comfort to the vast majority of the folks who are being displaced. And the numbers show that we're doing a very, very bad job creating new opportunities for the folks who've already been displaced. It's why I'm so passionate about the fact that we need to start moving in different directions. But I'm very pro-progress, and I agree with you that the last thing you want to do is try and have time stand still. This was actually the Trump approach, which was like to turn the clock back, and we need to turn the clock forward as fast as possible. Because the opposite of Donald Trump is an Asian man who likes math.
All right, I'm going to jump in. Is that okay? So one of the parallels you made is data as oil. And that's one of the things that long-term really honestly scares the shit out of me. Because if you think about what we do with oil, we bucket it, we price it, we fix the price, and then we kill each other over it.
Yeah.
And that's obviously a huge problem for like humanity. And so as we were talking earlier in the day about data equality is something that's already falling apart on a global level. Walls are getting put up in other parts of the world. And so I'm curious, as you think about maintaining our AIs or our automation or our machines access to information, or the information might reside in another country, obviously data equality or data access becomes an important part of like future industry success.
Yeah.
And so how do you think about negotiating or coming to an agreement with the rest of the world about how to treat data?
This is one of the biggest issues we have to get our arms around in the coming years, and we're just at the beginning of it, as most of us know. So our current approach towards data is this. It's a free-for-all. Companies get our data the way they get our data, and then they sell it and package it and repackage it and resell it. And we are sort of on the outside looking in. Like maybe we clicked a box at some point that we ignored. Otherwise, we're like, I just want to read your article, or I just want to see my friends, like click, click, click. And then our data is now getting spun out in various ways. It's still not as robust as the data in China because they have a more lax view about privacy, and the companies are much more aggressive, and the government is in on it. So you imagine that. That's like the data dials turned all the way up to 10 or 11. And for us, it's the companies just doing what they will with our data. Now, here's one of the saving graces, is that right now, some of our data is getting sold and resold. A lot of it is anonymous, and that data would actually become more valuable if it was individualized and personalized. Now, how the heck can you have that happen? The only way you have that happen is if the individual has actually an interest in sharing their data and agrees to do so, and is willing. Now, the only way they'll be willing to do so is if they're getting something in return. So that, to me, is the direction we have to go. I'm in the camp, just to speak for myself, like you can have my data if you make my life easier, as long as you don't like abuse it or do something, like I don't get spammed a lot or any of that stuff. And so we all have different data preferences. What we need to do is we need to have the data be ours and then be able to express that preference and hope that if you are even willing to individualize and personalize it, the value of that data actually shoots up and you can get a little bit in return. So this is, to me, the direction we have to start going. We have to start letting ourselves make decisions about this data. And it starts with acknowledging that the data is ours. Right now, that's not even clear. Right now, like, who owns my web surfing history? In theory, it might be me, it might be the browser, it might be the company that issued the cookies on my browser. And so as a country, we have to start saying first, who owns it? I would argue that we own it. And then if we own it, then how are other companies using it? How are companies benefiting from it? What might we get in return? Like, are we allowed to opt out? These are some of the most important considerations of our time. And to me, our country should be asking these questions and asking us, the American people, what our preferred approach is, as opposed to right now essentially having the default be we're bystanders, the companies are making the decisions for us.
Got a question on that side.
Hey, so you're at a tech conference talking to tech people that understand the nuances of choosing whether or not we have a data preference. How do you plan to address the chasm for all the people that you mentioned in terms of Congress, all these people that have no idea how this technology works, that are already 25, 30 years behind? You're talking to you're preaching to the choir right now. How do you address the individuals and how do you bring them on board with something they don't fundamentally understand, where you can't necessarily talk about the nuance?
Well, the first thing I need to do is win, brother. I need to win. After I win, I'll be there with Congress. I'll say, hey, you guys aren't up to speed on these issues so much, but I think we should head in a particular direction. And then I believe I can build consensus around it pretty quickly. So for better or for worse, Congress at this point knows it's behind the curve, and they know they're playing catch up. So I believe the American people get excited about a particular course of action. They'll be very, very open to that, particularly in an era where the tech companies themselves are openly saying we need some guidance and help on some of these issues.
Got a question right here in the front.
Yeah. I know you've talked a lot about your technology agenda sort of programs and stuff, and also like the Freedom Dividend or whatever you
Freedom Dividend, that's right.
Yeah, okay.
Catchy.
Is there anything non-like economy or technology that sets you apart from other Democratic candidates that you want to share?
Well, if you go to my website, yang2020.com, you'll see I have 105 different policy proposals, many of which are not tech or economy focused. Some of them have a tech angle or an economy angle, but many of them do not. Like, I think Puerto Rico should be a state if they want, like Puerto Rican self-determination, and get them out of that crazy debt load. Like, that isn't necessarily, I guess you could say that's like economically focused. Pay NCAA athletes, I guess that's economically focused. Not get into stupid wars, I suppose you could say that's economically focused. But if you go to my website, you'll see there are 105 policies, many of which do not talk about AI or technology at all.
Right up here.
So you mentioned that the freedom dividend is the thing you're really known for. And it feels like, so it's something that I hadn't spent too much time thinking about, but you laid out a strong argument for it that makes sense. I'd just be curious on the other side, what are the sort of main cons of it, or what do people argue against it? And then how do you respond to those? So if we want to advocate on your behalf or others do, they can respond to what, as you said, is a core issue.
Well, thank you. You're already thinking about your conversations at the bar. That Andrew Yang, how am I going to win over people to the Yang Gang? So the three main objections that people have are cost, inflation, and human behavior. So one, can we afford it? Our economy is up to $20 trillion. We can, if we have any mechanism to harness the gains from new technologies and innovations. And we get most of the money back anyway. Inflation, so this gets a little technical, but most of our consumer goods have not been going up in price, even as we've increased the money supply a lot. The three causes of inflation have unfortunately been very near and dear to us: housing, education, and healthcare. And those three industries are actually not open markets where they're not performing. Certainly technology is not bringing down the cost. Like, college has gone up 2.5 times in price. Healthcare has this giant intermediary system. Housing, it's like local zoning regs. And then human behavior, people talk about how no one's going to work if they're getting this money, which people in this room know doesn't make any sense because we want to work anyway. And there are two populations that work less with some additional money coming in: new mothers who spend more time with their kids, and teenagers who spend more time in school and graduate at higher levels. Everyone else works the same. So some people might have a knee-jerk reaction saying it's socialism, which it is not. Just tell them it is capitalism, where income does not start at zero. And it's going to be good for markets, good for business, good for consumers if people have money to spend. Look at this. I have forecast your conversation at the bar with your friends. It's going to be 80% in those lines.
And with that, we are out of time. So thank you very much, Andrew, for joining us today. It's been
Thank you, Monetery. Thank you, Iowa. Thank you, Douala. You're all the best. Thank you. Let's make history together. Thank you all. Thanks, man.